The wind in Willow Creek knew his name. It curled around the cedar posts of the Turner Ranch and pressed its cool breath along the eaves, whispering Elias the way Clara used to say it when the lamps went low and the day fell quiet. He rose before dawn, as he had every day since the accident, and struck a match to the stove. The flame caught with a small sound like a secret being kept. He warmed water, ground coffee by hand, and watched the pale line of morning lift over the pasture, as if the horizon were a wound trying to heal. The horses heard him before they saw him. Hooves shifted. A soft nicker rolled through the half-light. Elias stepped into the barn, the smell of hay and leather steadying his breath. He checked the water troughs. He checked the grain. He ran his palm along the nearest mare's flank. The gesture easy, almost tender, the way a man touches something that cannot hurt him back. The mare leaned into him a little, as if remembering the woman who used to braid her mane and hum while the sun warmed her braid. She had hummed every morning, Clara had. A tune that didn't belong to any hymn book or stage show, just a thread of sound she'd woven through the day so that everything they owned felt sewn to them. He led each horse into the pale pasture and latched the gate with a click that seemed too loud for morning. Then he walked the fence line, a coil of wire over his shoulder, a hammer at his hip. The fence had always been a thing that wanted to fall apart. He admired its honesty. Whenever a post leaned, he set it back. Whenever wire sagged, he pulled it tight. The work gave his hands something to do while his mind tried not to count backward, tried not to say the number of days since the coach slid on the shale beyond White Elk Ridge, since a wheel broke and a canvas top caved, and the world showed him exactly how quickly a life could be hushed. At the east corner he paused. From here he could see the road that ran toward town. A speck moved along it, a rider, Jonas. The boy, though he was almost 30 now, sat easy in the saddle, long arms loose, hat tugged down to keep the wind from taking it. Jonas waved once, and Elias lifted his chin in return. They didn't need more than that, or so Elias told himself. The distance was easier than the closeness had been, since he'd learned how silence could fill a house and not spill over. Jonas rode in and swung down, boots puffing dust. "Morning," he said, and let the word sit there, plain as bread. "Morning," Elias answered. "North line's loose again." "I'll fetch the staples," Jonas said. "Storm's been worrying it." They fell into the kind of work that makes a day disappear. Jonas set the post steady while Elias drove nails, and their timing kept pace like a song they both knew but wouldn't sing. Noon came. The sun climbed straight above them and hung there like a coin that wouldn't drop. They ate beside the fence, bread and cold beans, the conversation as spare as the meal. "Got a letter from my sister," Jonas said finally. "Baby's walking," Elias nodded. "Good," he said. "Time moves." He didn't say for some more than others, thinking to send them Clara's old cradle. Jonas offered, then paused, as if he had stepped out onto ice he wasn't sure would hold. "If that's all right." Elias kept looking at the fence. The word Clara still moved in the air like a lit match. He didn't flinch. He wouldn't allow himself to. "It's wood," he said after a moment. "Meant to hold weight." He took a breath. "Yes, send it." Jonas let out his own breath. Quiet relief. "I'll pack it careful." They returned to work. When the shadows lengthened, they rode back. Jonas peeled toward the bunkhouse. Elias dismounted near the porch and stared at the chair where Clara had used to sit with a book open on her knees, as if the world were a page she had been reading to him one line at a time. He could still find her hair ribbon under the porch rail, deep in the crack where the wood met its shadow, a strip of faded blue the color of distant hills. He didn't pull it free. He liked knowing it was there more than he would have liked touching it. Inside, the cabin carried its usual order. A tin cup on a hook. A calendar no one turned. A shelf of crockery that had lost nothing and gained dust. He set water to boil again and scrubbed the day from his hands. He ate a simple supper and listened to the quiet answer him. When the stars found the window, he took his coat from the peg, put on his hat, and walked into town. He did it every few nights. He told himself it was for salt and nails and lamp oil. The truth was, noise was easier to bear when he knew it would end. Willow Creek at night was a lantern-lit string of good intentions. The saloon door flapped like a lazy heartbeat. A piano did its best in the corner, certain keys a little drunk. Laughter tried to make itself bigger than sorrow. Men lay their stories down on the long, oak-like cards. Elias pushed through and took his usual place at the bar. He wrapped his fingers around a glass and sipped slow. Folks nodded to him, respected the boundary that grief had nailed between him and the life he'd once had. "Evenin', Mr. Turner," said May, who ran the place with a kindness that did not soften her rules. "You eat?" "I did," he said. "Something hot anyway." She set a bowl of stew beside his drink. "House insistence." He ate because May had that tone that undid argument. The stew was savory and simple. When he finished, he left coins enough to cover the bowl twice and retreated into a corner where the light didn't reach. He watched hands of cards bloom and die, watched a man don a grin like armor, watched a woman laugh, because if she didn't, the room would forget how. Every once in a while, a memory swam through the crowd and sat beside him. Clara leaning her head on his shoulder, Clara tapping the table to the piano's time. Clara sang, "We're richer than we know, Elle, we've got mornings." A chair scraped. Jonas appeared at his elbow. He had washed and changed. The jacket he wore was an old one. Brown leather rubbed soft at the seams. The collar creased into a shape that remembered the lines of his neck. He tipped his hat and kept his voice low. "Hardware store's short on nails. I'll ride to Thompson's in the morning." Elias nodded, eyes on the glass. "Take the bay. He needs run. I'll bring back feed if the price is decent." "Do." They stood there, two men who knew each other and didn't know what to do with that knowledge anymore. Jonas cleared his throat, glanced toward the piano, looked back. "You want company?" he asked. Elias shook his head. "Not tonight." The words came gentler than he expected. He didn't mean them to wound. They still might. "All right." Jonas set his hand flat on the bar as if to leave something there. Understanding, maybe. "I'll see to the tack, then turn in." Elias watched him go. Something tugged behind his ribs. He finished his drink and felt it worm its way outward. When he finally rose and stepped back through the swinging doors, the night folded around him like a coat he did not deserve but put on anyway. Stars were cold and clear. The street was nearly empty. At the far end, the new general store stood like a proud box, its windows square and honest. A sign in the glass said they had taken in a new load of donations from a ranch that had burned to its foundations last spring. Household items, clothing, tools, with handles scarred by other lives. Elias crossed to the store. Its door was closed, but not locked. In Willow Creek, you could still slip inside after hours if you left twice the coin and your name on a scrap beside the register. Mr. Finley allowed it for men who worked sun to sun and couldn't make the day's business. Elias struck a match and lit a small lamp near the counter. He wanted nothing in particular. A length of rope, perhaps, a tin of salve, a packet of needles in case a coat seam burst. He walked the aisles slow. Shelves smelled of flour and soap and iron. Bins of clothing lined the back wall. Folded donations Mr. Finley would wash and sell cheap to men whose pay came late. Elias paused at a stack of jackets, not because he needed one, but because the leather called to his fingertips the way it always did. He lifted the top jacket and found the next. He lifted that and found another. He set them aside, neat, seeing how each had been worn, how each had kept some man warm during a winter that would have taken him otherwise. The fourth jacket made him still. He knew its wear like a map, knew the rubbed circle on the left sleeve where a man's hand had landed when he thought about things too heavy to carry, knew the small nick on the breast where barbed wire had said hello one careless morning. Jonas's old jacket. Elias frowned. Jonas wouldn't have sold it. Jonas kept his gear until it fell apart, and then he kept it a while longer. Elias turned the jacket over, trying to thread a sensible story through it. Maybe Jonas had traded it for new boots. Maybe he'd left it behind when the bunkhouse was cleared last month. Maybe nothing was simple anymore. The jacket had grown lighter with years of use, soft enough to remember shapes. Elias ran a thumb along the inside lining. The seam lifted under his nail. Something shifted. Not the fabric. A weight. Small, rectangular. His pulse rose in his throat before his mind knew why. He slid his fingers into the inner pocket. Paper met skin. Folded, stiff at the creases from being kept too long. He drew it out. The lamp flame trembled in a draft, and the store's shadows leaned close. The paper was sealed. A scrap of wax no bigger than his fingernail held the flap closed. The seal was plain. The handwriting across it was not. Clara Turner. Her script ran sure and slanted, steady as a woman walking home who never once doubted the door would open and the light would be there waiting. The letters stopped his breath the way cold water stops a man who has waded in too far without thinking. The name burned on the paper and, somehow, in the air, above it. No other word existed. No other sound. Elias's first thought was wrong. It had no shape. It was all ache. The second thought formed enough letters to be dangerous. Why was her letter in Jonas's jacket? Why was her name in his hands now, 2 years too late? Why had the world kept this to itself, while he learned to breathe without her? He looked down at the jacket again, then at the letter. He did not know which one to blame for being real. He felt foolishly careful as he touched the edge of the seal. He did not break it. Not yet. His heart slammed once, twice. Then went the kind of quiet that meant the noise had moved to his limbs. He slid the letter back into the pocket, as if returning it could return the last 2 years as well. It did not. He took it out again, because leaving it there would be like shutting a door with a child in the dark. He set the jacket on the counter and held the letter up into the lamplight. The ink had not faded much. The wax shone dull. A corner of the paper had softened, as if it had been carried against a body for a long time, and the body had warmed it and not known what else to do. He turned it, saw his own name just below hers. Elias. Nothing else. No date. No instruction. Nothing to tell a man whether to run or kneel. The room had tilted. He steadied his feet wider apart. He set the lamp down. He listened for footsteps that were not there. For a laugh that would never be again. The store's clock ticked with rude health. Outside, the wind scratched at the eaves. Far off, a dog barked once at nothing. He could feel his heartbeat in his hands, big and obvious, as if it were trying to jump into the paper and hide. He slipped the letter inside his coat, like a thief who had stolen his own past. He folded Jonas's jacket and laid it back on the stack where he had found it. He smoothed the leather with his palm, a gesture that felt like apology and accusation at once. Then he blew out the lamp. The smoke curled up in a ribbon that faded before it reached the ceiling. The night accepted him the way it accepts a man who has carried his silence like an extra shadow. He crossed the street without looking to see if anyone watched. No one did. The town was asleep. He climbed onto the porch at home and paused with his hand on the door, letter firm against his ribs, as if it were another heart and he were afraid to listen to both at once. Inside, he lit the stove again, though he didn't need the heat. He needed the light. He sat at the kitchen table where Clara had used to shell peas and tell him about the book she was reading. He set the letter down in front of him. He didn't touch it for a full minute. He just looked. Then he reached and held it by the edges, the way a man holds something fragile that he knows can also cut. He breathed in. He breathed out. His thumb worried the wax. The seal waited. The clock on the wall counted 4 slow beats. He did not break it. He could not break it. He sat there with his past in his hand, every nerve awake and afraid, the whole house leaning with him, the night pressed close against the window like a face trying to see. Elias did not sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table until the lamp burned low, its wick coughing small circles of smoke. The letter lay before him, its edges lit by the last sliver of flame. Every time he thought to open it, his hands forgot how to move. It was not fear of what was inside. It was fear of being certain. Certainty had taken enough from him already. Outside, the wind brushed against the shutters like fingertips testing a door that refused to open. The stove ticked as it cooled. Elias's reflection floated faintly in the window pane, hollow-eyed, unshaven, more ghost than man. He rubbed his thumb over Clara's name again and again until the paper warmed beneath his skin. When the lamp finally gave out, Dawn had already begun to stain the horizon gray. Elias rose, his knees stiff from stillness, and slipped the letter into his vest pocket. He stepped out to the porch, the chill morning air biting through his shirt. The world was waking, roosters crowing, cattle stirring, but it felt foreign, like something he was only pretending to be part of. He saddled the bay horse, moving through the motions of a man still anchored to habit. Jonas was already by the barn, tossing hay into troughs. "Mornin'," Jonas said, eyes red from lack of sleep. "You're up early." Elias nodded, pulling his gloves tight. "Couldn't sleep." Jonas studied him for a beat, as if hearing the crack in the words. "Something wrong?" "No." Elias mounted, shifting in the saddle. "Fence on the west ridge needs checking. I'll be back by noon." Jonas nodded again, but his gaze lingered. He looked like a man trying to hold a truth in his mouth without letting it spill. Elias urged the horse forward. The ride was quiet. The land spread wide and endless, the pale gold of dawn soaking the plains, the mountains distant and blue as memory. Every hoofbeat carried him deeper into his thoughts. He touched the letter through the fabric of his vest. He could feel the sharp edges against his chest. It was as if Clara herself were pressed there, whispering from beneath his ribs. Why had Jonas kept it? Lo! That question circled like a hawk. Jonas was loyal, good-hearted. He'd worked Elias's land for nearly a decade, slept under the same roof when storms rolled in. Clara had liked him, trusted him. Elias remembered her once saying, "Jonas has an honest soul, even when he's quiet about it." Had she trusted him enough to give him something meant for Elias? The thought made his jaw tighten. Jealousy was an ugly thing, and he thought he'd buried it with her coffin. By mid-morning, the sun sat high, and Elias stopped by the ridge. He dismounted, checking the posts. Each one solid, no damage worth mentioning. He wasn't fixing fences. He was hiding from the letter. Hours passed. The sky stretched pale and empty overhead, the air heavy with dust. When he finally turned the horse homeward, he realized he'd done nothing but chase ghosts. Back at the ranch, Jonas was chopping wood near the barn. The steady rhythm of the axe echoed through the yard. Thunk, breath, thunk, breath. Elias stopped by the water trough, wiping his face with his sleeve. Jonas looked up, sweat darkening his collar. "Find a break?" "No." "Then what took so long?" Elias didn't answer. He untied his canteen, drank, and turned toward the house. Jonas called after him. "El, you all right?" The name stopped him. Clara used to call him that. Hardly anyone else did. He hesitated, then nodded once. "I'm fine." He wasn't. Inside the cabin, the light felt harsh. Dust floated in the air like small ghosts, catching on beams of sun from the window. Elias drew the letter out again and set it on the table. He tried to think of Clara's hands, how they would rest against his face when she wanted to quiet him, how she tied her hair back before making bread, how she would fold notes for him to find in his coat pocket when he rode out before dawn. Little things she wrote, simple lines. "Be careful. I love you. Bring me a story when you come home." This letter looked the same, folded with that same care, only now her hands were bones beneath the dirt up on the hill. Elias stood so fast his chair tipped over. He crossed the room and pulled down a bottle from the shelf. The whiskey burned his throat, but the heat didn't reach the ache. He set the bottle down hard, then gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. He wanted to tear the letter open, but some part of him whispered that once he did, he'd never unknow whatever truth waited inside. A knock startled him. Jonas stood at the door, hat in hand. "You all right? Thought I'd bring you some stew before it gets cold." Elias motioned for him to leave it on the counter. Jonas hesitated, eyes flicking to the table. "That's Clara's handwriting." Elias froze. Jonas took a step closer, voice low. "Where'd you get that?" Elias turned slowly, anger rising like thunder. "You tell me! I found it in your jacket." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Jonas's face went pale. He opened his mouth, shut it, tried again. "You weren't supposed to." "Weren't supposed to what?" Elias's voice cracked. "Find it?" "You've been carrying her words around for 2 years." "Why, Jonas?" Jonas swallowed, looking cornered. "She asked me to keep it. Said Said if something happened, I should give it to you when you were ready. Elias laughed once, bitter. Ready? You think a man ever gets ready to read a letter from his dead wife? Jonas's voice broke. I tried, Elle. I did. But after the funeral, you couldn't even say her name. I thought... You thought wrong. Elias stepped closer, chest heaving. You had no right. Jonas didn't argue. His eyes shone, wet but steady. You're right. I had no right. But she trusted me. I didn't want to betray that either. The room felt too small. Elias turned away, gripping the back of a chair to steady himself. Jonas's voice came quieter. She loved you more than anyone, Elle. She wrote that for you. For you to find peace. Elias couldn't answer. He just stared at the letter. Jonas's footsteps retreated toward the door. I'll be at the barn, Jonas said softly. If you want to talk. When the door closed, the silence felt heavier than before. Elias sat again. The whiskey bottle glinted in the light. He pushed it aside. He didn't need fire to face this. He needed courage. He took a breath, then another. His hands shook as he broke the wax seal. The sound was small, fragile, as though the past itself had cracked open. The first words blurred before his eyes. My dearest Elias. He blinked hard. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. I need you to know that leaving wasn't because I wanted to. I was sick, sicker than I let on. I rode to Thompson's to fetch the medicine I couldn't ask you to get. I didn't want you to see me afraid. His throat closed. He read on, the words trembling in his hands. You were the best thing this world ever gave me. You built a home out of dust and laughter. You made me believe that love could last longer than breath. If heaven has windows, I'll be watching you rebuild the fence, feed the horses, and smile again. Don't let my love become your prison. Let it be your strength. He pressed the page to his chest. Tears came quietly, sliding down his face, unashamed and raw. For the first time since she died, her voice wasn't gone. It filled the room, soft, alive, forgiving. He read the rest slowly. She mentioned Jonas near the end. Jonas promised he would wait until you were ready. Don't be angry with him. He only did what I asked. Take care of him. He's more alone than he lets on. And take care of yourself, my love. The world still needs the way you laugh. The letter ended with a smear of ink where her pen must have trembled. Elias read it 3 times before folding it again, careful, as though touching her. His body shook from the storm building inside. Relief, guilt, love, regret, all tangled until he couldn't tell them apart. He stood and paced the room. The air felt different now, charged with everything unsaid. He looked at the photo of her on the wall, the one taken on their wedding day. She was smiling, head slightly tilted, eyes full of mischief and trust. I'm sorry, he whispered. God, Clara, I'm sorry. The night stretched long and silent after that. Outside, rain began to fall, light at first, then harder, until it sounded like the sky itself was trying to wash the earth clean. Elias tucked the letter into his coat and stepped outside. He didn't grab his hat. The rain soaked him as he crossed the yard toward the barn. Jonas was there, mending a bridle by lantern light. He looked up, startled. Elias stopped in the doorway. His voice was rough but clear. She forgave us both, Jonas, before we even knew we needed it. Jonas blinked, then lowered his head. The lantern flickered between them. Elias stepped closer and laid the letter on the table, beside the tools. She trusted you because you were good, he said, and she was right. Jonas's lips parted, but no words came. Elias put a hand on his shoulder. The rain drummed harder against the roof, and neither man moved for a long time. Outside, lightning split the sky open in silence. Inside, 2 men stood between grief and grace, each holding a different piece of the same love. And for the first time in 2 years, Elias felt the weight on his chest loosen, just enough to breathe again. He looked toward the open barn door. The rain had slowed. Dawn was somewhere behind the clouds, waiting. He whispered to the quiet, "She's still here." Jonas nodded. Always. The wind swept through the doorway, soft and cool, carrying the scent of wet lilacs from the hill where Clara rested. Elias closed his eyes and let it touch him. For the first time since she died, the night didn't feel endless. It felt like the start of morning. The night after the rain smelled like clean earth and lilacs, though the flowers had long since withered from the hill. Elias barely slept. The words from Clara's letter ran like a melody through his mind, soft and unrelenting. Every time his eyes closed, he heard her voice, not as a ghost, not as a whisper, but as memory so vivid it hurt to breathe. He lit the stove before sunrise. The coffee boiled too strong, but he didn't care. He poured it black and bitter, sat by the window, and watched mist crawl over the pasture. He'd thought that reading her letter would bring him peace. Instead, it had split him open. He was grateful, but also raw. It wasn't the kind of closure he'd imagined. It was life waking up inside him after years of pretending to be dead. Jonas entered quietly, hat in hand. His face looked older in the gray light. They hadn't spoken since the night before, not beyond the few words that hung between them like a truce. "Coffee?" Elias asked. Jonas nodded. Elias poured him a cup, slid it across the table. Neither of them spoke at first. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, just fragile, like a bridge built out of the remains of grief. Jonas finally said, "I didn't sleep none." "Me neither," Jonas sipped. "I keep hearing her voice, how she sounded when she laughed." Elias's hand tightened around his mug. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That laugh could start a storm or stop one." The two men sat in the pale light, listening to the crackle of the fire. When Jonas spoke again, his voice carried something gentler. "She told me about the medicine," he said. "Said she didn't want you to know. I wanted to tell you, El. God knows I did. But she made me swear." Elias nodded. "I believe you." He meant it. The anger that had clawed through him last night had burned itself out. What was left was sorrow and an ache for understanding. "She trusted you, and she was right to." Jonas looked down. "Doesn't feel right." "Maybe it ain't supposed to," Elias said. "Some things just sit inside you and never smooth out." Outside, a crow landed on the fence post, calling once before lifting into the sky. The sound felt like a punctuation mark, the closing of one thing, the start of another. Elias stood and fetched Clara's letter from his vest. He unfolded it carefully, setting it between them on the table. The ink had bled in the rain a little, softening the words, but not enough to erase them. "I keep thinking," Elias said, his eyes on the paper, "about what she meant by not wanting her love to be my prison. Maybe that's what I've done these past years. Built walls around her memory and called them devotion." Jonas stared into his cup. "You did what you had to. We both did." Elias smiled faintly, bitter and fond, all at once. "She wouldn't have wanted this house to be a tomb." Jonas nodded. "No, she'd want it full of noise again." Elias glanced around at the quiet cabin, the bare shelves, the unturned calendar, the stillness that clung to every corner. "Then maybe it's time," he said softly. "Time I stopped keeping her ghost company." Jonas looked at him, and for the first time in years, his eyes had hope behind them. "You mean that?" Elias nodded. "I mean it." That morning, they worked the ranch like men with purpose. The storm had knocked a few rails loose, but they fixed them fast, moving in rhythm without words. The wind was cool, the sky vast and blue, and the smell of wet soil carried something almost holy in it. The bay horse trotted alongside the fence line, tail flicking, and Elias caught himself smiling, a small, startled thing, like a boy remembering he could. Jonas noticed but didn't say anything. He just smiled back and handed Elias another nail. By noon, the sun burned hot again. They rested under the oak near the stream, the same place Elias and Clara used to sit on summer days. Jonas lay back against the roots, hat over his face. Elias watched the water slide over stones, flashing like bits of sky. He spoke after a while, voice quiet. "You ever think about leaving, Jonas?" Jonas shrugged under the shade. "Sometimes, but Willow Creek's the only place I ever felt like I belonged." Elias nodded slowly. "Same here. Feels smaller now, though, like the town's been holding its breath since she died." Jonas lifted his hat slightly, squinting. Maybe it's been waiting on you to breathe first." Elias laughed once, a sound that felt strange and alive in his chest. "You always had a way of saying things that cut deeper than they sound." "That's Clara talking through me," Jonas said with a grin. "She'd smack me if I didn't." Elias stared at the sky. "Yeah, she would." They finished their break and headed back to the barn. By the time the sun dipped low, they'd repaired half the north fence and cleared the old shed of junk Clara used to swear she'd make use of someday. Elias found a cracked mirror, a tin comb, a stack of yellowed letters she'd written to her sister. He set them aside gently, each one a relic. When evening came, Jonas headed for the bunkhouse. Elias stood by the porch, watching the sunset spill over the plains. The horizon glowed deep orange, fading into violet, the kind of color Clara used to stop and admire like it was a miracle. He reached into his pocket, feeling the folded letter again. He didn't want to put it away anymore. He wanted to keep it close, not as a wound, but as something living. He walked toward the hill where she was buried. The path was familiar. Every stone, every dip in the trail. The air was cool and smelled of sage. Fireflies had begun to blink along the grass, their small lights soft as breath. When he reached the grave, the wooden cross was still there, weathered but standing. He knelt and brushed the dust from the carved letters. Clara Turner, beloved wife, gentle soul. He placed the letter on the ground, weighed it down with a small stone. "You can rest easy now," he whispered. "I know the truth." He looked up at the sky, stars beginning to appear one by one. "I miss you," he said, "but I think I can start living again. You'd want that." The wind answered, soft, slow, like fingers running through his hair. He closed his eyes and let it move through him. A faint sound reached him from the valley. Jonas playing his harmonica, the tune rough but tender. Clara had loved when Jonas played by the fire after supper. Said it made the night feel less lonely. Elias smiled, standing slowly. "Guess some things never leave," he said. He started back down the hill, each step lighter than the one before. That night the cabin felt different, still quiet, but no longer suffocating. He lit a single lamp and sat at the table again, the smell of oil and wood filling the air. He didn't drink. He didn't stare at the empty chair. He just sat, listening to the night breathe. He pulled a piece of paper from the drawer and dipped his pen in ink. The first words came slow. "My dearest Clara, I read your letter. I think I understand now. You didn't leave me. You were just trying to spare me the sight of your pain. And though I'd give anything to have said goodbye proper, I know your love hasn't gone anywhere. It's here, in every sunrise and every laugh I try to find again." He paused, staring at the lamp flame flicker. His hand trembled slightly as he wrote on. "Jonas stood right by you. By us both. I'll tell him that again tomorrow, and I'll tell him he can stop blaming himself. You were right. Forgiveness isn't something we earn. It's something we accept." He folded the note but didn't seal it. He wasn't sure who it was for her or himself. Before bed, he walked outside again. The moon hung full and bright over Willow Creek. The air smelled of grass and horses, and the faint sweetness of lilac still lingering from the hill. For the first time in 2 years, Elias didn't feel the pull of the grave pulling him backward. He felt it behind him, yes, but the road ahead was finally open. Jonas's lantern glowed faint in the distance. The sound of the harmonica drifted again. This time, the tune lighter, a melody that climbed instead of wept. Elias smiled into the night. "She'd like that," he murmured. He turned toward the barn, brushed his hand along the fence he'd rebuilt that morning, and whispered a quiet thanks to the land, to the letter, to the woman who'd taught him that love doesn't end. It just changes shape. When he finally went inside and lay down, the bed didn't feel cold. The air didn't feel empty. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 2 long years, sleep came easy, deep, quiet, and filled with the faint hum of Clara's laughter carried on the wind. And somewhere in that space between dreaming and dawn, he heard her say it one last time, not from a grave, not from heaven, but from the place love never leaves. "You did good, Elle." The wind carried it through the window. soft and sure. Elias Turner smiled in his sleep. For the first time since she died, his heart didn't ache. It simply remembered how to beat. The rain returned 3 nights later, heavier than before, as if the sky had been waiting for the right moment to break. Thunder rolled low over the plains, shaking the windows of the Turner Ranch. Elias stood on the porch, coat pulled tight, watching lightning split the horizon in quick, silent flashes. The air carried the smell of dust, wet wood, and something electric, alive. He hadn't meant to think about Clara tonight, but she had a way of finding her way into every silence. Even after the letter, even after forgiveness had loosened the ache in his chest, she lived in the pauses between one heartbeat and the next. But this time, her memory didn't drag him down. It steadied him, like the weight of a hand on his shoulder. Jonas had been quiet these past days, doing his chores without speaking much. He carried guilt the way some men carried their hat, never setting it down, even when they didn't need it. Elias had told him he was forgiven, but he could see in Jonas's eyes that the words hadn't sunk deep enough. Guilt was a stubborn thing. It needed more than words to die. It needed truth. The wind whipped harder. Elias turned toward the barn. Jonas was inside, finishing the harness repair. The lamp flickered against the rain-streaked boards, casting long shadows across the hay. "You'll drown in here if that roof gives," Elias called over the thunder. Jonas looked up, smiled faintly. "Roof's held longer than I have." Elias stepped in, shaking the rain from his coat. "You planning to fix that before morning?" "Can't sleep much when the storm's got teeth." Jonas sat back on a stool, hands rough and steady, despite the tremor in his voice. "Storm like this makes a man think too much." "Then maybe we should talk instead," Elias said. Jonas looked at him for a moment, surprised. "Talk about what?" "About her." Elias's tone was calm but certain. "You've been carrying that letter like a brand, Jonas. She wouldn't want that." Jonas exhaled, long and slow. "It ain't that simple." "It is," Elias said, stepping closer. "You did what she asked. You did what you thought was right. That's all a man can do." Jonas's jaw tightened. "She trusted me, El. But I failed her. I was supposed to give you that letter if she didn't come back. I waited. I thought maybe you'd forget, maybe time would do the talking for me. Instead, I watched you fall apart and said nothing." Elias's voice softened. "You didn't fail her. You protected me from something I wasn't ready to face." Jonas looked up sharply. "That sound like forgiveness?" "It is forgiveness." Jonas stood, restless. "You make it sound easy. I don't know how you do that. Every time I close my eyes, I see her riding out that morning. She turned in the saddle, smiled at me like she knew I'd never see her again. I waved, didn't say a damn thing worth remembering." Elias's throat tightened. Neither did I. The barn filled with the sound of rain drumming the roof. Steady and relentless, lightning flashed, bright and close, and for a moment the two men's faces were lit like portraits. Elias's calm but wet with memory, Jonas's raw and broken open. Elias said quietly, "Clara wrote that you were more alone than you let on." Jonas flinched as though struck. "She said that?" "She did. She knew you carried more than you showed." Jonas's voice cracked. "She always saw too much. That's why everyone loved her. She made a man feel like he was better than he was." "She did," Elias agreed. "But maybe she wasn't wrong." Jonas sat heavily on a hay bale, elbows on his knees. "You ever wonder what she'd think of us now? Two old fools talking about ghosts in the rain." Elias smiled faintly. "She'd tell us to shut up and help with the horses." Jonas laughed once, sharp and unexpected. It broke something open in both of them. The storm raged harder outside. Water dripped from the rafters, pattering into the straw. The lamp hissed, its flame shrinking and swelling with each gust. "I think I kept that letter," Jonas said after a long silence, "because part of me wanted to keep her close. I knew she was yours, always was, but that letter, holding it, felt like she wasn't gone yet." Elias nodded slowly. "I understand that better than you think." Jonas met his gaze, eyes raw. "You forgive me for that too?" Elias didn't hesitate. "I do, because I've done worse to myself." The lightning struck again, closer this time. The ground trembled. Somewhere outside, a branch cracked and fell. Jonas looked toward the sound, then, back at Elias. "We've both been punishing ourselves, haven't we?" "Seems so." Elias stepped closer and put a hand on Jonas's shoulder. "Let it go. Let her rest. Let yourself rest." Jonas tried to speak but couldn't. His voice caught, choked by everything he'd been holding back for 2 long years. The tears came silently, cutting lines through the dust on his face. Elias didn't move away. He just stood beside him, steady as the post that held the barn together. When Jonas finally spoke, his voice was no louder than the rain. "Thank you." Elias squeezed his shoulder once. "She'd be proud of you." They stayed there until the storm began to fade, the thunder rolling farther away, the rain softening into a whisper. Jonas took a shaky breath. When she left that morning, she said she'd be back by supper. I kept her seat at the table that night, just in case. Guess I never stopped waiting. Elias looked at the lantern flame. "Then stop waiting, Jonas. She came back, in her own way. You helped her find me again." The wind sighed through the broken slats. Jonas nodded slowly, wiping his face. "I reckon you're right. Reckon Clara is." The 2 men laughed quietly at that, a sound that felt like dawn breaking. By morning, the world was washed clean. The sun rose slow, light spilling over wet fields that shimmered like new glass. Puddles mirrored the sky, the horses grazing near the fence as though nothing had ever been wrong. Elias walked out to the porch with 2 mugs of coffee. Jonas joined him, eyes swollen but lighter. "World smells new," Jonas said. "Storm'll do that," Elias replied. "Tears, too." They stood in silence for a while, watching the fog lift off the hills. The air was cool, soft, forgiving. "I was thinking," Jonas said finally, "I might move on come spring." My sister wrote again. She says the baby's walking and her husband's got more work than he can handle. Could use an extra hand. Elias turned toward him. "You sure?" Jonas nodded. "Yeah, it's time. Clara's letter. It gave me permission to stop hanging. On to this place." Elias smiled, though it stung. "Then you go with my blessing," Jonas chuckled. "Your blessing's worth more than a paycheck, El." Elias shook his head. "Don't get sentimental on me." They laughed again, easy this time. When Jonas walked away a few days later, riding out toward the east road, Elias didn't feel hollow. He stood by the gate, hand resting on the post, watching until the figure grew small and vanished into the light. The land stretched wide and endless again, but for the first time it didn't feel empty. It felt alive. Weeks passed. The fields greened, the air turned warm. The lilacs on Clara's hill bloomed early that year. Elias rode up one afternoon to see them, their scent thick and sweet in the sun. He stood there for a long time, hat in hand, looking down at the wooden cross. "Jonas is gone," he said softly. You'd have liked the way he smiled when he left, like a man finally free. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small tin box that held Clara's letter. He didn't need to read it anymore. He knew every word by heart. Still, he opened it once more, eyes tracing her handwriting. "Don't let my love become your prison." He smiled, folded it back, and tucked it into the box. Then he buried the box beneath the lilac bush, pressing the soil firm with his palm. "There," he murmured, "you're home." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of flowers down the hill. Elias turned toward the ranch, sunlight on his shoulders, and for a moment he swore he heard her laughter again, soft, near, alive in the rustling branches. He paused, smiled, and whispered, "I hear you." Then he walked back down the path, slow and steady, toward a world that no longer felt haunted. That evening, a storm cloud lingered far off beyond the ridge. It glowed pink and gold as the sun dipped low, harmless now, like a memory that had learned how to stay gentle. Elias sat on the porch, coffee warm in his hands. The horses grazed in the fading light. The air hummed with crickets, and the wind carried the smell of lilacs through the open door. For the first time, he didn't feel like a man waiting for something to end. He felt like a man beginning again. And when the last of the sun disappeared, leaving only the glow of the sky, he whispered one final thing to the quiet, the only prayer he still believed in. "Thank you, Clara." for loving me enough to let me go." The wind answered, soft as a breath, and the night settled easy around him. Somewhere beyond the horizon, thunder rolled again, not in warning, but in blessing. The year turned slow over Willow Creek. By spring, the earth had softened, the streams ran clear, and the land wore its green like an old friend come home again. Elias Turner stood in the middle of his pasture one morning, hands on his hips, watching the wind move through the grass in long, shimmering waves. The air smelled of rain and lilacs. The sound of horses grazing was steady, peaceful. For the first time in years, his heart matched that rhythm. Jonas had been gone for nearly a month now. The ranch felt quieter without him, but not in the lonely way it used to. It was the quiet of things healing. Every day Elias found small traces of his old friend. Tools left on the shelf, a half-fixed saddle, a worn glove hanging by a nail. Each reminded him of the storm that had passed and the friendship that had survived it. He woke early every morning, sometimes before the roosters. He'd light the stove, make coffee, and step out onto the porch while the world was still half asleep. The sky would blush with light, the mist lifting off the creek, and he'd think how Clara would have loved mornings like these, soft, gentle, forgiving. He still visited her grave every Sunday. He no longer spoke to her as a man desperate for answers. He spoke like a man sharing his day. He told her about the fence he fixed, the calf that had been born early, the new coat of paint on the barn. It wasn't conversation so much as continuation, a quiet promise that her name would always live in his days, not as sorrow but as song. Willow Creek itself had begun to change. The train tracks were finally being laid a few miles east, and the town buzzed with talk of new faces coming in from Denver and beyond. The saloon now had a new piano brought in on a freight wagon. The schoolhouse reopened, and with it came a new teacher, a widow named Lydia Moore. The first time Elias saw her, she was standing outside the school, gathering children in from the rain. Her dress was plain but neat, her dark hair pinned back loosely, strands curling along her neck. She laughed softly as she herded the children inside, her voice bright and kind. Elias had been passing through town for supplies, but he'd found himself stopping by the fence just to watch for a moment. Something about her reminded him of the world before grief, simple and alive. A few days later, she came to the ranch. The church was organizing a gathering to help rebuild the community barn after the last storm, and she was asking for volunteers. "You must be Mr. Turner," she said as he met her by the gate. Her smile was polite, but her eyes were curious, as though she'd already heard something about him. "Pastor Reynolds said you have the strongest back in town." Elias chuckled. He must have forgotten the years that come with it. "I told him the same about mine," she replied, then laughed. It wasn't forced or fluttery. It was warm, the kind of laugh that filled a space without needing to own it. He nodded. "When do you start?" "Saturday at sunup. We'll need hands and a bit of patience, I imagine." "I'll be there," Elias said simply. "Good," she said, tilting her head slightly. "It's nice to meet someone who doesn't run from work." He smiled faintly. "Work's the only thing that doesn't run from me." She laughed again, and for a heartbeat, something in Elias loosened. He hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd smiled at a stranger without guilt tugging at him. That Saturday, the whole town came out to the barn site. The morning sun was sharp and golden, the smell of sawdust and fresh-cut wood thick in the air. Men worked the frame. Women cooked stew over open fires. Children chased one another through the grass. The sound of hammers rose and fell like music. Elias worked alongside Lydia most of the morning, lifting beams, steadying ladders, handing her tools when she asked. She moved with quiet efficiency, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her face streaked with dust and light. Every now and then she'd glance his way, her eyes catching the sunlight. At midday they sat under a tree with tin cups of lemonade. Lydia wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "You work like a man trying to outrun something," she said lightly. Elias smiled, not denying it. "Maybe I am. Old habits." She studied him for a moment, then said softly, "Sometimes it's not about outrunning. Sometimes it's about catching your breath long enough to see what's behind you isn't chasing anymore." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw a quiet strength behind her easy manner. She wasn't young in the way girls were. She had the kind of beauty born from surviving things. "Was your husband from around here?" Elias asked. Careful, respectful. "No," she said, gaze steady on the horizon. "He was a soldier. Didn't come back from the war. I came here after. Thought maybe I could teach children how to find peace, even if I never could." Elias nodded slowly. "I buried someone too." Lydia turned her eyes toward him, soft with understanding. "I figured. They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to." The silence between them was comfortable. Two people who'd known loss sitting in the same sun, letting it touch their faces again. When the barn was finished by evening, the whole town celebrated. Fiddles played, lanterns swayed from beams, laughter rose high. Children danced barefoot in the dust, and the old men told stories that stretched the truth until it was beautiful. Lydia convinced Elias to stay a while longer, even though he hadn't planned to. "Just one dance," she said, holding out her hand. He hesitated. "It's been years." "Then it's about time." He took her hand. The music was slow, the air warm. They moved awkwardly at first, but as the song carried on, his steps found their place beside hers. He could almost feel Clara smiling somewhere beyond the stars, whispering, "See? I told you you'd smile again." When the music ended, Lydia didn't pull away right away. She looked up at him, a question in her eyes, but she didn't ask it. She just smiled. "You did fine, Mr. Turner." "Elias," he said quietly. "Elias," she repeated, and something in the sound made the world feel new again. In the weeks that followed, Lydia began stopping by the ranch now and then, sometimes to bring books for the school children he helped with, sometimes just to talk. Elias found himself looking forward to her visits. They'd sit on the porch, the world fading to gold around them, talking about everything and nothing. She asked once if he missed his wife. He told her yes, every day, but that missing her no longer felt like bleeding. It felt like breathing. Lydia nodded and said she understood. She had learned, she told him, that love wasn't a chain. It was a seed. It didn't die with the person. It just found new soil. The summer passed that way, slow and full. The town grew livelier, laughter echoing through the saloon, church bells ringing every Sunday. People began to notice the light back in Elias's eyes. Even May at the saloon teased him. "Careful, Turner," she said one evening when he stopped in for supplies. "That teacher's going to make you forget how to frown." Elias laughed. "That'd be a mercy, wouldn't it?" May smiled. "About time someone did." As autumn came, the fields turned amber and the days cooled. One morning, Elias rode out early to the hill where Clara rested. The sun was rising behind the trees, painting everything in honey-colored light. He knelt by the grave, brushing leaves from the cross. "Things are changing, Clara," he said softly. "The town's growing. The ranch is strong again. There's laughter in the house. You were right." I smiled again. He laid a fresh lilac bloom on the soil. "Thank you for loving me enough to let me live." The wind stirred, gentle, carrying the scent of the fields below. Elias stood there for a long time, eyes closed, the warmth of the sun against his face like a hand he remembered. When he rode back, Lydia was waiting by the porch, holding 2 cups of coffee. She smiled when she saw him. "You're up early." "Always," he said, dismounting. They sat together on the steps, steam curling from their cups. The air was crisp, and the world around them shimmered with dew. A flock of birds took flight in the distance, dark shapes against the morning sky. Lydia looked out toward the hills. "It's beautiful here," she said. Elias nodded. "It is. Took me a while to see it again." She smiled gently. "Sometimes it takes losing something to learn how to look." They fell quiet, watching the sun climb. The day stretched open before them, and for the first time, Elias didn't feel the weight of the past holding him back. He felt only the warmth beside him, the steady rhythm of life returning. And as the wind carried the soft scent of lilacs across the fields, Elias knew he'd kept his promise. To Clara, to himself, to the life still waiting. The ghosts of Willow Creek were finally at peace, and the man who once lived with silence learned At last, how to laugh again. In the wide silence of Willow Creek, love did not end. It simply changed its shape. Elias Turner learned that some hearts never truly die. They just find new ways to keep beating. Through grief, forgiveness, and the quiet courage to begin again, he discovered that even after loss, the world can still bloom with color, laughter, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles, where every tale rides through heartbreak, redemption, and the kind of love that outlives the dust and the years. Don't miss the next story that'll make you believe all over again in love's wild, untamed spirit.